All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get started. Awesome. Our Red Barn event tonight is with some local representatives and county and chamber, city employees, just with some project updates. So thanks for coming and engaging with our representatives. At all of our events here at Wenatchee River Institute, we start with a land acknowledgement, and we created this with the Piscosa or Wenatchee people. And so we're spreading the message that they would like to be spread to the public. And behind me is a map that the Colville Confederated Tribes gave us permission to show others. The land Wenatchee River Institute sits on is the ancestral homelands of the Shimpish-Squawshu, Piscosa, or Wenatchee people. The Shimpish-Squawshu, meaning people in between, had villages positioned along the Wenatchee River. Their ancestral homeland extends from the Cascade Ridge throughout what is now known as the Wenatchee and Okanagan Valleys. The culture and economy of the Shimpish-Squawshu people centers on fishing. They also gather roots and berries, basket-making materials, and medicines, and they also hunt game. The Shimpish-Squawshu are named within the Yakima Treaty of 1855. Language to establish the Wenatchee Reservation was never followed through, even with the needed surveying completed. And many of them now live on the Colville Reservation, which is 150 miles northeast of Leavenworth. And you can see that on the map outlined in red. The Piscosa people are still alive today. They continue to practice their culture within their homelands and are working to get some land back. The Piscosa people are the original stewards of this land. And we offer this land acknowledgement as the first step to amplifying Indigenous voices and recognizing the harm done to them as a people. We encourage everyone to learn more about them and the Indigenous peoples of the place where you now call home. The Wenatchee River Institute is committed to sharing this land acknowledgement and following up with other actions to educate and be respectful. So I'm Rachel Bishop. I'm the Community Programs Manager here at Wenatchee River Institute. And we have a couple other staff members here. We have Carolyn Griffin Bugert, who's our Executive Director, and Randy Zerger, who is our Marketing and Outreach Manager. And I don't think anyone's in the crowd, but maybe they're virtually watching. So if you don't know who we are, it's your first time here. We're a nonprofit environmental learning center. Our mission is to connect people, communities, and the natural world. But just real quick, I know you all are real interested in hearing from the folks who are going to speak tonight. But I just wanted to take some time to share with you what we've been doing this last month because it's pretty crazy. We've hosted 5 Red Barn events here. This is our 5th. This is just this month of March. We started offering them hybrid. We've held lots of different workshops, identifying plants, swapping seeds for our gardens, modeling with clay, tracking wildlife, and foraging for nettle. And our youth education team has been traveling to schools in Wenatchee, Chelan, Rock Island, Brewster, and also taught students here on our campus. So there's a lot going on, and we're having lots of fun, and we appreciate you all being here and engaging with us tonight. So tonight is a hybrid event. So you all are here in person. We also have a camera up there. And so there are virtual people joining from their couch or the bed or wherever. So welcome virtual friends as well. If our virtual folks have questions, you can use the Q&A or chat. And if you have questions in person, you can raise your hand. And on that note of it being hybrid, we would appreciate just, kindness and patience with us. This is our first time not having our tech man here helping us. We think we've got it all figured out, but there may be a little, just pause while we move some cords around, but it will all continue forward. Great. So we have to thank our sponsors because they helped us make these events happen. So these folks up here are local businesses and organizations that feel passionate about us gathering people together. So you can see all their names: the Chamber of Commerce in Leavenworth, who's here tonight, North Central Washington Audubon Society, Rhine House, South Restaurants, Sage Mountain Natural Foods, Ludwig's German Restaurant, and Icicle Brewing. Wild Birds Unlimited in Wenatchee, the Sweets on Main, Visconti's Italian Restaurant, Cured by Visconti, the Bubblery, Gibbs Graphics, Leavenworth Rad Tours, and Brunner's Lodge. And since we have a captive audience, we have a couple upcoming events. Next week, we have another Red Barn event, and this is in partnership with Waste Loop and Sustainable Wenatchee, which is now becoming Sustainable North Central Washington. And that's a Red Barn on composting with red wrigglers, which are worms, and it's so you can compost throughout the year, and yeah, use up those kitchen scraps. And then that same week on April 9th, we have a event in the Red Barn learning about how to have mason bees in your backyard. And lastly, another Red Barn, also with Waste Loop, but Waste Loop is another nonprofit in Leavenworth that's working on putting together a community composting program for the Leavenworth. So if you're interested in how you can partake in that as an individual, or if you're a business owner, you should come and listen. Winton Manufacturing is partnering with Waste Loop to make that happen. It's a huge facility in Winton. So yeah, it's a really exciting project coming to our area. Okay, so tonight we have Bob Bugert, our county commissioner, and Leavenworth Mayor Carl Florea, and a couple other folks from the county, from the chamber, who are going to be giving updates on all kinds of things. And at WRI, we feel it's important to engage with our representatives, so thanks for coming. And some issues tonight may ignite emotions inside you. And so we just hope that everyone is kind and respectful, and just remembering this is a community event. Yeah. So thank you for coming. And we're going to pass it over to Bob first. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you, Rachel. Really do appreciate it. I do thank you, Wenatchee River Institute in general, and you and Randy for all that you've done to put this together for us. It's a great partnership. But I also want to thank Chris Clark, who always does such a nice job as far as getting the word out to the community. And I appreciate everybody showing up and engaging in dialogue here. So good. Agenda up already. So there's a bunch of stuff on. We do have an update on the Cascade Orchard Bridge deck renovation, which is the one out Icicle Road. And we've got two major grants that we were able to secure and to really update that. And we got our Public Works Director, Eric Pearson, that will be online with us tonight if we get the technology worked out. So we want to share that with you and give you an update on that. There's some other stuff going on with Public Works that he'll cover as well. And then next on, Kirsten. Hi, Kirsten. Thank you for coming. Yep. So Kirsten has been quite busy nowadays, and so she was gracious enough to carve out time to do this. And she's going to give an update on the short-term rental implementation now that the code is in place, and we're going through that processing right now. And so Kirsten will give an update and be able to address any questions that folks may have on that. And we'll kind of walk you through how the whole thing is playing out. And then Natural Resources always has a bunch of stuff going on. And so we've got Mike Caputa and Aaron McKay back there that will give updates on that. Mike will be talking about the multimodal pathways planning process, which is a countywide process, but it's got great implications for the Upper Valley here. And we'll be able to go into a little bit deeper dive related to that. And then Mike is going to transition over, and you're going to do the tubing part, right? With Troy, wherever there's Troy. Yeah, thank you from the Chamber of Commerce. And Troy, thank you for coming as well. And then last but not least, we'll do some updates on a study that's underway related to creating a whitewater river
we understand that we may not have the same approach to every issue or the same thing, but we have the same interests in protecting what we have, protecting our river, protecting this environment, giving our folks access to things like the pathway. That is a big deal, I know, for us in the Upper Valley, as we've done surveys and things. Having that connectivity down valley in those is important. So there are a lot of things that are in common that we need to cooperate on, and it makes sense to cooperate on. And what's fun is, I've found, is that we're able to do it. And I really, really respect Bob and all of his efforts that he's put in, and how well we've been able to do these. But this is a lot of the county issues tonight, but they impact us, all of us in Leavenworth. And so, you know, a lot of these are ideas and concepts that'll get played out over time, and we'll all be engaged hopefully throughout that process. So this is, again, this is not, this isn't coming down with things. This is beginning conversations. And so I really,
it's a good way to
just
put it.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
So thank you for being here, and hopefully we'll have a little bit. There are a few things that at the end, if we have time, that I'll add in. But
yeah, we'll make sure we got time at the end here, but we will be done at 8. Guarantee you that. Okay. With that in mind, by chance, do we have Eric Pearson available? This is the Techno challenge going on right now. Yeah.
We can all sort of sing along for a moment.
Okay. This is the part where I have some chords to move around.
Anybody know any good jokes? So if you want to buy a beer, it's around the corner on the show there.
Okay, Eric, it's your turn.
Okay, let me share my screen.
So let me introduce, this is Eric Pearson. He is our county engineer, the Public Works Director. And looks like you got something that works there. Great. So I'm going to pass it over to Eric, and he can walk through. Eric, can you hear okay?
I can.
Okay.
And I just want to promise you I'll have my camera on in a second, but I'm at the office. I'm not sitting on my couch. So the project we want to talk about today is the Orchard, Cascade Orchard Bridge. And so what Commissioner Bugert was saying.
Hey, Eric. Eric, can you hang on a sec? We need to work on our audio part. He's the Director of Public Works. Yep. Can you try talking to Eric?
Can you hear me now?
Very low. Yeah.
Just let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, I wonder, Rachel? This is yours, isn't it, Jefferson? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if I can just move this one over. It's not working? Tell you what, why don't I do it? Okay. Hey, Eric.
Yeah.
I am going to cover it myself. Okay. I think I got enough to know. You just be around and keep me out of trouble if I screw up on something.
Just
Okay.
let me know when you want to show the plan sheets and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. Why don't we, let's take this down. What do we got here? So this is Cascade Orchard Bridge, which is the bridge just a couple miles up Icicle Road there. Yeah, what's that?
Curved bridge.
The curved bridge, yeah, the one that it really is something that we've been wanting to address for quite some time. And so this was on our capital improvement plan, transportation improvement plan that has been identified as a priority. Thanks to some really good heads up ball plan by Eric Pearson, who is on our statewide county road board. So he's actually got a considerable amount of clout as far as bringing in funds for a lot of these things. And we've been particularly lucky in the fact that Eric has been able to bring in a fair amount of funding for bridge renovation in Chelan County. And so this one, again, was one of our priorities. One of the things, there was just general need for renovation of the bridge, resurfacing of the deck. But also, we had heard very loud and clear, based upon some of these community meetings that we've had, that the bike and pedestrian issues are pretty important. And so, what Eric was able to secure an initial grant for the resurfacing, and then he presented it to the Board of Commissioners to look at some of the options available for improving the bike and pedestrian safety issues there. And actually, it was fairly expensive, that additional component there, because you have to cantilever out to make it sufficient to have that space there. But the board felt was important enough that we actually wanted to take some funds, there we go, out of our general fund, which is our sacred cow, that we rarely take funds out of that thing. But this one we felt was compelling enough reason. So we did allocate those funds, and then sure enough, Eric was able to follow through and get just yesterday, I believe, Eric, wasn't it right? Just a grant, a supplemental grant, Jill, that's correct. So that we're able actually to be able to use this almost predominantly, almost exclusively now through grant funding. And so we will be able to start this. He's going to present this again to the board on Tuesday, and we will certainly approve it. And we will actually proceed this summer, this work on it. Okay, Eric, this is where I may need your help. You see, I can walk further away, can I, a little bit here? Yeah, so you can see over here, there's some of the, Eric's got the cursor there. You can see the cantilevered edges on either side. There's going to be the railings, and it's going to be a pretty good improvement on both sides of the river there. Okay, and so this will begin. Eric, when will this start, do you think?
This is once we award it on Tuesday, then it's going to be up to the contractor as far as getting the schedule, getting the contract and everything else in. And then we'll get a schedule from them. The total contract is 60 days. And so it'll take a little bit of time. And we, unfortunately, for doing this sort of work, we will have to have the bridge closed with a detour for about 4 weeks.
Yeah, so we'll want to walk you through that. That's the good news, but there's also a little bit of bad news we have to share with you. Eric, hopefully people can hear you well enough. What's the total cost for this?
The total cost of this project is 2.3 million. The contractor's bid was 1.9.
Okay.
So if everyone
This is
can hear
small
me,
operation.
do I have sound there again?
Are you guys hearing that? Okay, no. So the estimate was 2.3 million, and but it sounds like we got a bid that came in at 1.9, and it's been reviewed, and I think it's good to be go. So the time frame will be this summer. Eric, it's July, August.
I would anticipate that's when they'd start up. Work is in July.
Okay.
They still have to secure materials. This railing has to be built. And so that railing is going to be about 4 foot 8 inches high, which is a lot taller than what the existing rail is.
Okay, did you hear that? Okay, starting July, going into August. So it is, admittedly, it's a challenging time as far as the road closure. Can we go on to the next slide then that shows the road closure? The detour. Okay, so as to be expected, there's the bridge right there itself. And so during that time period, there will be a detour that goes around East Leavenworth to get up to the upper Icicle Valley there, as to be expected. There's not too many options, obviously, related to that. But we do thank you ahead of time for your patience related to this. We just went through this experience thanks to this guy's leadership. We just did the largest construction project ever by Chelan County. That was the West Cashmere Bridge, $25 million project. That thanks to that guy there, we're basically doing it on time and generally on time, a little bit delayed, but certainly within budget. And it was a major undertaking there. So our biggest delay, without going into too much detail, was we had quite a bit of easement challenges related to Burlington, Northern Santa Fe. And there's an air easement as far as doing construction over the track. And without getting into too much difficult, they were quite difficult to work with. And so we did get through that. And it did cost us some additional funds, but it was within our reserve account that we built into the bridge itself. But the last pour, the concrete was just Tuesday? Yesterday. Was it yesterday?
yesterday.
Okay, thank you. We still got the railing to put on, got some work in the roundabout. One of the things that is a heads up for those of you that are rafters, we still have the temporary bridge trestle underneath, which does affect some of the rafting capability there. So we do apologize ahead of time related to that. It should be done, the road should be open and usable. The bridge should be open and usable by July. And so we're quite pleased with that. It really came out well. Yes, sir.
Well, on the diagram, for those of us who don't know diagrams very well, what will be done to the bridge? Is there a destruction of it, or is it just going to be expanded outward? Can you tell us a little bit from that diagram what's actually going to be done?
Yeah, this guy will probably roll his eyes when I explain it because I'm no engineer. But my understanding is we're going to cantilever out both sides to widen the bridge quite a bit. The bridge itself, the decking needs to be, a lot of it needs to be removed and then resurfaced, which is a pretty expensive, pretty difficult process. And then there'll be 4-foot-high railings on it to protect bicycles and pedestrians. So there'll be a clear delineation, separation for bike peds versus the traffic itself.
There'll be nothing done to the approaches on either side.
No, not too much, to my knowledge. Is that correct?
What was the question?
Is there much modification of the roads that are entrance to either side?
No, the main modification you'll see is we'll have some approach slab work and just pavement up to it. And then, of course, putting the 8A ramps on the sidewalks.
Okay,
In terms of on this sheet, you can see the top one is actually the existing bridge. And you can see when you go down to the bottom of the final, this is kind of how we're basically encroaching over and cantilevering a little bit to get that width.
okay, I hope you folks can hear that. Okay, thank you, Eric. Yes, sir.
So from the appearance of that diagram, it looks like you actually use some of the main road bed, the addition of the sidewalk, is that going to remain its current width, or is there going to be an improvement to the actual roadbed itself? Is this just wings for sidewalk?
It is improvement. The question is there an improvement to the roadbed itself for the vehicular component? Is that correct? In
Is there
addition,
an expansion or reduction in the functional width of the roadbed?
no, there's specific standards set as far as the road width.
That's just the resurface and then the addition of the wings for.
Yes,
for
that's
beds.
correct.
Got it.
Yes. Yes,
Will the bicycle pedestrian section be elevated above the road surface like it is now, or it will be at level?
I believe it's level. The question is, will the surface be above or not? I believe the bicycle component will be level. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, the sidewalks, Commissioner Bugert, are actually, you can see it's just like your typical sidewalk. It actually
Yeah.
has a curb and out. It's just not going to be those, really high ones that you saw in the existing small sidewalk.
Okay. Probably you folks can't hear much of that. Yeah. So it'll be improvement basically over the existing where it is elevated quite a bit, but there will be some elevation above. Yeah.
Clear, that does show that diagram, does appear that those pedestrian pathways do encroach on existing roadbed facing the diagram. You can see the additional width in the sidewalk in the lower image versus the existing at the top.
Well, this is where I need Eric here. Did you catch that question, Eric?
No, I didn't.
So the question is the roadbed itself, is that going to be narrower than existing?
It will be brought in a little bit to accommodate the sidewalks.
Okay, I was mistaken then. It sounds like it will be brought in a bit. Yes, to
But
accommodate the sidewalks.
but the total width will be close to 23 feet.
The total width will be close to 23 feet. That's what he said.
It doesn't seem that if there's a raised walkway, that's going to help the bicycles.
Folks, if you're gonna ask a question, please raise your hand because the virtual people can't hear you. So I gotta bring the mic to you.
The expansion would help the pedestrians, but the bicyclists will still have a narrow bridge to cross, it seems, even more narrow.
Oh, that's not my understanding, sir, as far as the expansion there. As far as providing a higher degree of safety and width for
Does
the
that mean the
bicycle.
bicycle would have to go onto the walkway? Which would.
Boy,
impede-
I'm the wrong guy to ask
okay.
about this. Yeah, so I think I am going to move us on. We do have a fair number of other bigger issues than this that we'd like to address. And I can certainly stick around and maybe we can actually link in our
Thank you,
Public
Eric.
Works Director so you can actually have a better opportunity to have some in-depth conversation with him about that. The other thing, one quick thing related to Public Works as well, is that the brush yard is going to be open tomorrow for collection of debris. You're within the apple maggot quarantine area, which is, so really we need to make sure that we keep the brush and debris that is generated in this general area within this area. So we do have the brush yard that is available. It's going to be opening up starting tomorrow. And so we do appreciate your support and work on that. So that will be chipped up and we'll be able to process that appropriately. Any other issues that I can address right off the bat related to Public Works? Okay, without further ado then, I think I'm going to ask Kirsten Riles, who is the head of the short-term rental division for our Community Development Department, to come on up. Thank you, Kristen, for coming up. And I have your own microphone.
That'll work, I
Okay,
guess.
then-
Yeah, they've got those up there. So this has been a huge challenge. This has been a major undertaking, something that's never been tried to be regulated in the county before. And we are working really hard to try to get through it all. I can't even, all the overtime in the world. No matter what, I will make that deadline, I swear. So let's talk about where we are right now. This is a breakdown.
This is the 2019. Actually, I want the next page down.
These are the numbers that we were working off of for the existing applications that came in. And then these are the numbers that we'll be working on for any of the new applications to get processed. So this is broken down not only by zip code, which was required by the code, but it's also broken down by the UGAs and sub areas, which is what a lot of people were asking for. It does get a little tricky when you're trying to figure out how all these numbers add up. And in some places, honestly, they don't. And in talking to the Office of Financial Management, that is in large part to the way that the map overlays work. The map overlays for the Leavenworth sub areas, for example, are not necessarily, they don't match up with exactly the overlay for the Leavenworth UGA. So the numbers are close, but they're not going to match up perfectly when you try to add them together. We have processed at this point 660 provisional applications. Those are the ones that were the existing owners. And we have started processing the new applications, starting with the tier 1, which are the owner occupied. Because per the code, by June 30th, we have to have processed not only the new tier 1 applications and either issued them permits or denied them for cause, as well as all of the existing applications that have been given provisional permits. We have to go back and research each and every one of those properties and either issue them their permanent permit number or deny them for cause. It's a lot. And I get a lot of calls every day asking why it takes so long and why we're not through it faster. There's a few reasons. One, there's 2 of us that are doing the majority of this work, and each property takes a long time. If it's a property that say is a lot of new builds and we look it up and all the permits are there and it's beautiful and it's pristine and everything, just, you know, the angels are singing and everything lines up, those can go really quick. But if we open up a property and there's no building permits, or there's permits for structures that's not actually what was built, or we've got, say somebody's designated where their parking is for their short-term rentals, and those parking spots end up being in an easement or a setback area where they can't be, those take a lot longer. And we do try the best we can to work with owners or their property managers or the representatives to try and resolve whatever issues we can, but there are some issues that we just can't resolve. And those ones do end up getting denied. So 2020, that's the other question I get a lot. Why are we using 2020 numbers processing the 2022 new applications? The Office of Financial Management runs a little bit behind. Per the code, we have to have our new numbers out to you every year by March 15th. I have to have them to the board. Office of Financial Management does not have updated numbers by March 15th. So we'll be in essence running roughly 2 years behind at all times. The other issue we had was a lot of people noticed that from the 2019 numbers to the 2020 numbers, in some areas, the available total housing stock actually went down and didn't go up as you would expect. Census is only done every 10 years. And in the years in between, the Office of Financial Management estimates those numbers. So when 2020 rolled around and they actually did the census again, in some areas, it actually turned out that the total housing stock was less than what was estimated. So those numbers did decrease. Now I know that there's questions, so I'm happy to answer questions.
From what you're saying is if you are not in urban growth area, this does not apply to you from what I'm seeing?
Not necessarily. So it's broken down by zip code. And each zip code has a cap. The majority of the county has a 6% cap. Only Manson UGA has a 9% cap. So the first thing we look at when we're looking at whether or not we can process a new permit is if that zip code is over 6%. If the zip code itself is not over 6%, then we can look down into if there's room in the UGA or in the sub areas of Leavenworth, Plain Lake, Wenatchee. That's the only time we get down into the smaller areas. But the first thing we look at is the entire zip code. Okay.
One thing about the Shasta is that the 0% there, I believe, applies to the R1, R2, and R3 zones. There's a downtown commercial zone where there are some residents also where they are permitted.
That's correct. The Manson the Peshastin UGA has said that they don't allow any in their district, but it is carved out in the code that in the commercial districts, they are allowed. That is carved out.
Wait.
Yeah,
She's running really fast.
just the math, like 264, there's existing. Why is it negative 153?
Because of the existing short-term rentals that were already in operation that got that quote unquote grandfathered status. So those negative numbers is how far over the cap it is in these areas. And when you see that negative number, no new permits will be issued in those areas until they are down under the cap.
I'm just curious to clarify Wenatchee, you've got 0 in the UGA. So are those numbers you're saying the 212, which is the cap, is that including the UGA and that's why 0 is available? And does that also include the entire 98801 zip code?
So the 98801 zip code is that 3538. In theory, Wenatchee UGA would have a 6%. However, Wenatchee in their code does not allow short-term rentals in the UGA unless it's a tier 1 bed and breakfast.
So that includes the county then.
Yeah, makes a lot of people really unhappy. Yes, sir. Wait, time out. You can count your steps for this.
Do the housing units include hotels and motels?
It's not hotel motel, but it does count apartments, mobile homes, trailer parks. Mhm. She's coming.
Is there a way to tell the ones that are existing whether they have a grandfathered permit or not?
So far, we have not gone back and started back through all those grandfathered. They only have their provisional permit. So the whole purpose of that provisional permit was, excuse me, for all those people who were already in business, we checked some very basic, really high level, make sure they had certain things in place. And if they did, then they could get that provisional permit so they could stay in business while the rest of it got sorted out. So we got all the way through all of those grandfathered applications. And now we've started the tier 1 new applications. And we still have to go back through each and every one of those 660 and do what we in the office, we call it a deep dive on each property. Yeah. Which information? So the question is once we get back through all the provisional applications and whether or not they are turned into permanent permits, will there be a way to look that up? There's not at this point, but it's something that we're working on. I think the goal, Commissioner Bugert, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the goal is to make it so that there's a searchable database. So you'll be able to find out, hey, I want to know if my neighbor's operating a short-term rental. You would be able to look that address up. That I believe is still in process, but we don't have that together yet.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Kirsten. It's a real challenge. We really want to maintain the privacy of these homes here as far as having a searchable database, but also that to make sure that we have, if there are people that do have concerns or complaints about a particular property, that they are able to identify whether or not it is a legal short-term rental. And so we're working on that right now, coming up with different options for that. We haven't got there quite yet.
Yeah, and I do know that one of the big concerns of a lot of the short-term rental owners is having a listing like that with all the addresses listed and basically creating a shopping list for burglars. So it's a big concern. Dave, I saw your hand up. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just a clarification. I looked early when the discussions were happening
Mhm.
about some of the numbers, and 98826, that zip code.
Mhm.
I got the impression it was broken up into about 4 different sub areas. And so this 153, it's not, there are areas that don't meet, haven't met that level. Is that, am I misinterpreting what I saw?
Let's get it up so I can see what you're talking about. And then there it is.
Great. See where it says the minus 153, we talked about that earlier. That's the total zip code. I saw some, and I could have misinterpreted, but 98826 is very large. And so it was broken into 4 different subcategories. I don't know how the subcategories were created. I'm sure there was some logic behind what happened, but it doesn't equal that way. There are some areas in 98826 that you could still apply, is how I read that chart.
While in the Leavenworth UGA, it shows that there's 7 available. The Leavenworth UGA does not allow short-term rentals unless it is a tier 1 bed and breakfast. There have been some that were applying for grandfathered or do have provisional permits that are being reviewed. But in large in part, they're not going through. Yeah.
But my question is, they're not 4 subdivisions of 98826. That's 1 zip code that is over the cap. And so no new short-term rentals will be issued in 98826.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier.
Okay,
And yeah,
I'm
until those areas come under the cap.
Right, I just needed clarification because I thought that there was it was broken into these subcategories that wouldn't have.
Well,
It
it
didn't-
is broken into the subcategories, but that's what I was saying. So we look at the whole zip code first.
Okay.
And the whole zip code would have to not be at 6% before we then went to the sub areas. But this chart does account for the sub areas, so you can see how far over they are in those. Yeah.
And if I could add, Kirsten, you correct me on this one if I'm off, is that the UGA area, the county applies the code and standards that the city sets.
Correct.
So that, there's much more restrictive than within the UGA, and that's manifested there.
Right. And then the other piece of that with the UGA per the code is any application that comes from an urban growth area anywhere in Chelan County, that application then goes through a joint review process with the county and the city in question before it gets passed or denied. Dave?
Specifically relating to the searchable database, which I agree is dangerous ground. As you see on the west side, half crime will travel. Wouldn't the rather robust sign requirements not satisfy local interest to be able to identify STRs and not publish a database to the greater metro at large? Like, certainly I would think that those requirements would be adequate for those in the immediate need of that information. And we couldn't put that out into the interweb for everyone to just sort of pluck through at their own leisure.
There is, and I agree that it could be a challenge to have a searchable database, and I understand the concerns of the owners. However, anybody that has applied for a short-term rental permit needs to understand that that's a matter of public record. So whether somebody does it through a public records request on a specific address or a specific, couple of addresses, they can get that information.
But you know who's in it.
Yeah, the county knows who gets it, right?
There's more of a barrier
But-
to that information.
But that's something still up with the commissioners. Yeah.
I just have to circle back on this because the
Yeah.
math is driving me crazy. Why is Leavenworth not positive 49 and negative 153? Because it's the only one that doesn't, the math doesn't work.
So you've got the whole Leavenworth up there at the 4391. And then you've got to subtract Plain, Lake Wenatchee, and Leavenworth UGA from all of that.
So that lines out. The 264 is the cap, 215 is existing. So 264 is it.
Whoops. Yes, should be yes. Sorry, I dropped my ring. And I am the first one to tell you that I am human, not the android. I do make mistakes. I did have a very nice gentleman call me the other day and point out a mistake I had made. So I've gone back through this several times. I've gone back and forth with OFM several times. The initial data that they had sent me just made no sense, and I couldn't make rhyme or reason of it. So I went back to him, and I kept him on the phone for a really long time, and thankfully he was very nice. I said, this just doesn't add up. And then the light bulb went on, and he said, oh, well, the UGA number we send you includes the city housing units as well. So then I had to go back and recalculate and subtract the city out of all those. So it has changed, but I believe we are right on this one.
Well, we have a Zoom question. Who will be policing where there are illegal STRs doing business?
There's a couple ways we're going to look at that. So where are we going to police? How are we going to police that? So of course, we do get calls from neighbors on neighbors, and we do and submit those to code enforcement. We are also going to look at a third-party vendor that will be regularly sweeping the platforms to check, who's advertising places for rent here, and then cross-checking that with our registered list of short-term rental permits to see who's not permitted, and then those will be contacted with code enforcement as well. I did also just hire, and he starts Monday, a code enforcement liaison specific to short-term rentals. So he will be doing some of what we call the desktop enforcement, and sending those initial letters and getting those into the system, because the code does have built into it that there can only be a certain number of infractions within a certain time period, and they can lose their permit. So.
I know you're still processing applications, but is there any way to know or to estimate how many people want short-term rentals that can't get them because of these caps?
I don't have a count on it. However, anybody that is a tier 2 or tier 3, say in this zip code, that I've already sent out the denial letters for those. However, I have also kept them off to the side in a folder on my desk, just in case some of those grandfathered provisional permits don't go through as finals. And if, cross your fingers, room opens in the cap and we're able to permit a couple of those new ones, then we'll go back and we'll look at those in the order that they were date and timestamp received in the first place. Just this year. We're not doing this every year. Yes, sir.
So the 4391 for Leavenworth 98826, is that in Leavenworth city limits?
That is not city limits.
So you also have Leavenworth UGA.
We count the UGA, but the county does not permit within city limits. So we don't count that.
I understand that.
Yeah.
So what's the relationship of Leavenworth and Leavenworth UGA?
So the urban growth area is that area around the city that could be annexed at any time in theory. And then the rest of that is the Leavenworth sub area that's not Plain, that's not Lake Wenatchee, that's still in the zip code.
The non-UGA that's not the sub areas. Gotcha.
Hi, thanks for coming up, Kirsten. How many, because nuisance issues were such a problem with STRs in the last 3 months, have you had a lot of, you must have had tons of citations going on?
There have been some, I wouldn't say a lot or a ton. The challenge right now is, and as I'm explaining to people when they call in, they're calling it a complaint, but if it's a provisional application or it's an application that hasn't been processed yet, we don't know if they're operating illegally or not. So we have to really get through those applications before we know who's not operating legally and who we need to have code enforcement go pay a visit to.
We'll do 2 more questions and move on to our next topic.
I'm sorry to circle back to my questions. I'm kind of like question over here and my mind's still
You're okay.
processing. I'm assuming we're talking Airbnb because like when I look at Wenatchee, there's no way that you only have 10 Airbnbs listed in the 98801 zip code. So am I missing something or are those just not applications? Things aren't processed? What's happening?
So I will guarantee you there's more than that. And I have also been contacted by several, I'll call them short-term rentals, even within the city limits of Wenatchee that we don't permit, of course, as the county. But there's a lot of them out there and we know they're out there that are not permitted. So that's going to be a matter of us getting through so we know for sure who is and who isn't. And then really starting a lot of that desktop, going in, looking at the platforms. We have a whole list on our board, on my board in my office right now, that have come up either through questions or when we've been researching other properties, we've noticed this property, or we've been on Airbnb or VRBO researching a certain property. And then we see the picture for the next one. We're like, oh, that's that property I just looked at. So we're making a list that we can go back and contact those people after.
One more.
We got a Zoomer. Okay. What will be the penalty for having an illegal STR in the future?
It depends on if it's just that it's unpermitted, and I say just, they will get a cease and desist from code enforcement. If they continue to operate after they've had that, there are civil penalties and fines. They can be up to $750 a day. Okay. Back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Kirsten. So appreciate your comments, your questions, your concerns related to this. This is obviously an ongoing process with the code having been stood up here just recently, and we're ramping up our staff related to do that and get this up and running. Thank you, Kirsten. Okay. So same thing that our code enforcement, we are working on getting that better structured so that we can be able to handle this whole process. It's quite an undertaking. Okay, Mike. Yes. Okay, you are going to take on the tubing right now or the pathways?
Why don't I do tubing?
Okay.
Why don't I do that with?
Okay.
Troy, do you want to do this with me? Should I do the overview? How do you want it?
And I'm sure you all know Mike Caputa, our Natural Resources Director.
Another non-controversial topic. Yeah, okay. Can you guys hear me okay? Can they hear me okay with this? Yeah, great. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Mike Caputa, I'm the director of the Chelan County Natural Resources Department. Thanks for coming out tonight. And thank you, Commissioner Bugert and Mayor, for sponsoring this. And thank you to our hosts at Wenatchee River Institute. I'm going to give you an overview of the tubing study that we did a couple of years ago and kind of give you an update on that. I think some of you have participated in some of these, so help me out if I have any gaps in this discussion. I'm going to cover a lot of the work that a committee that we convened has been doing around this topic. And then Troy with Chamber of Commerce is going to talk about the Chamber's role in some of the new programs that they have. So probably over the last 10 years, 15 years, we've seen particularly in the last maybe 3 or 4, an exponential increase in the number of tubers that we see on Icicle Creek and the main stem Wenatchee River. This map shows you, and you probably are all familiar with the number of the different put-in sites that people use officially, and there's lots of unofficial ones as well, for tubing. And it varies, during the season, right? Some early season, folks are putting in on Icicle Creek up at the fish hatchery as flows drop. And then folks are putting in on the Wenatchee River, right? So it changes throughout the season. We've been getting, the commissioners, we're getting a lot of concerns and complaints, and this has been going on for several years. And I'd say really kind of reached a boiling point in the last 3 years. Just a lot of user impacts, trespassing, what have you. So Commissioner Bugert asked us to convene a group of stakeholders to take a look at what was going on. Because mostly, we had information, we had a lot of stories, we had a lot of anecdotal information, but we didn't have any actual data. Now, I won't say that we did any kind of scientific study, but we did send people out to count. And so they stood on the riverbanks and they counted tubers and they watched where people were putting in. And sure enough, on a couple of weekends in 2020, it would have been 2020, I think it was, there were a lot of people putting in. I think in one 6-hour period, we had something like 1,600 tubers, 1,700 tubers, right? So it was, I think it confirmed what people were seeing, but I was surprised by that number. I would have guessed maybe 500 or 600, but 1,700, that's what the number was. And that's a big number, right? I think the other thing we found in this work is that not all of them were commercial tubers. I think it's something like, if I remember the numbers correctly, Aaron, tell me if I get this right, but I think it's like 40%, 50% were commercial, the other 40, 50% non-commercial, right? So it was kind of an even split. Yes, sir.
Are you including paddle boarders and everything that floats in tubers?
You gotta.
Go ahead.
Are
Yeah,
you
so
including paddle boarders and everything that floats as a tuber?
We counted them in the numbers. We didn't call them all tubers, but yes, right. So
1,700.
yeah, I think that, pretty high percentage, like 90-some% were tubers, right? So that was, those were big numbers. But it also, we also understood then that any kind of solution, whatever, the solution may be, would have to be broad-based, right? Because we have people putting in the county, we have people putting in the city, because of the seasonal aspect, we have commercial and non-commercial. And so trying to address this issue and trying to understand what the impacts are was challenging for us, frankly. And so one thing that came out of that last year was the Chamber of Commerce stepped up and expanded their ambassador program. I'm not as familiar with all the ambassador programs that the Chamber has going on, but the Chamber started a river ambassador program to help encourage better behavior by folks. And so I'm going to have Troy, why don't you come up and give us an overview of that? And then I think we can get into maybe some of the next steps we may be talking about. That work?
It started off with a joke, but I'm scared of getting slapped because apparently that's a thing now. So Troy Campbell, Executive Director of the Leavenworth Chamber of Commerce. So just the Recreation Ambassador program we started last year. And because of that data that came out of the study, what I saw from that meeting was basically a schedule for when volunteers could be working at those locations. And so we built a program that is a service grant program. And basically how it works is a nonprofit organization gets to sign up for the application to be a recreation ambassador. And that nonprofit has to put together a team of volunteers that will work one weekend in the summer. And by doing that service grant, that nonprofit this year could make up to $2,000 per weekend. So it's a way for us to get people out there, educating people about river use, but also as a passive way for nonprofits to use it as a fundraiser. So last year we went from early July through Labor Day weekend. We had 6 locations. We did 9 weekends. We had over 50 50 volunteers that raised over $23,000 for local nonprofits. And that included the Chelan Fire County #3, Columbia Breaks Fire Interpretive Center, and the NTIAT Chamber, who combined Chelan County Mountain Rescue, Leavenworth Mountain Association, and the Upper Valley Historical Society and Cascade Medical Center. Those groups of people, they all met here. It was a hybrid training. Here at the Red Barn, they did the training with all the municipalities, the city, the county. We also had the Forest Service, we had Cascade Medical Center, did some training, and our sheriff gave some training as well. So they were all armed and ready with all the things that they needed to do when they go out. And those locations were the hatchery, the East Leavenworth boat launch, Barn Beach Takeout, Icicle Road Bridge, but we also did 8 Mile Trailhead and Stewart Lake Trailhead. And this year we're hoping to expand if we get the approval to do Snow Lakes and Lake Wenatchee as well. So this would be, we're also expanding the timeframes. We'd like to start a little bit earlier in June this year and go all the way to Labor Day. So that is what we're hoping to do with this. We also use it as, there may be future regulations that happen. And so what we also have is we have volunteers out there every single weekend counting cars, counting people, counting all the things that might be needed when we talk about future regulation, or if there wanted to be regulation, we need that data. So we've got that data from every single one of the peak weekends in the summer now. How many cars were there, done at specific times, so it's always consistent as how many cars are at 1 o'clock and what kind of issues come up. And there were some little, some things that happened that were really great. We felt really good about the fact that we saved a dog's life. There was a dog left at the Stewart Lake Trailhead in the car all day. There was a couple other river rescues and things that took place. So we're arming the volunteers with information specific to that location. What needs to be portrayed to visitors and residents that are there? What are the dangers? What are the things that we want to keep an eye out for? So that is basically the Recreation Ambassador Program. And like I said, we do have other ambassador programs, but this one is specifically for outdoor recreation. And that's kind of it in a nutshell, unless you can think of anything else. Give this back. Oh, yeah.
How much you, as a city, going to make per person floating down the icicle?
How much will the city make?
Yeah.
I will direct that to Carl because I have no idea how much the city makes.
I'm not familiar with what I know we did up the charge. But we're also, again, spending more resources, again, on these kind of regulations and being aware of what we're doing. So, yeah, it's going to be, we're looking to the future, and we know we're going to need more regulation and more things that are going to happen stepping forward. So, it's going to be a part of that process is getting that funding to do it.
Yeah. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah. So the city's making money off of property, the river property that the city doesn't even own. All you own is on the Wenatchee River. So what about all the landowners that live on the river that are enduring all these trespassers? Because the river is non-navigable and it's not owned by the state. I have proof. I have all the paperwork. I have patents. These are all patents. First of all, it started from the Wenatchee Indian tribe. They owned all the land. They had a 6 square mile reservation here. The white man supposedly took it away, but realistically, they bought it for $20,000. Then they patented the land, and the railroad, Great Northern Railroad, alternate sections every mile. And one of those properties is where I live. And the river is not owned by the state. And they cannot prove it. I have paperwork to prove it that I own. They can't prove nothing. They're allowing trespassing on the river. There's 3 categories of rivers. There's a non-navigable, that means trespassing floating down the river. There's a second category. It's floatable with a bolt of shingles. That is still owned by the property owner, owns the bed. And they're still trespassing. The public has a right to float. But companies, commercial, do not have a right on the river.
So we have quite a bit of, Will and I talk about this issue all the time, right? And respectfully, there's a lot here about in terms of navigability, ownership. Probably won't resolve it tonight. We've had quite a lively email exchange about this topic. I think there's more to come
Well, it's
on
just a
this.
lot to hire an attorney to fight this because
Right,
you're fighting
right,
state.
right.
And I sure
Right,
can't fight it, but
right.
I'm willing to go in a joint venture here.
Right, right.
We've been
Right.
for 12 years, we've had nothing but hell.
Right. So I'd say silver lining of what we've been doing, right? We understand the problem a lot more, right? We know, for folks who live on the river, there's an issue there, right? We understand it a lot more now. You have elected officials who are interested in addressing this. We have a committee, which I know that's, but
People have a
we're
right to vote
we're
on it,
government.
say they
We're
don't.
government. We love to put together committees, right? So put together a committee. We have some action. What I really like about the county, city, other partnership with the chamber is that we have this public-private partnership, because I think this is not something that just the public sector can solve. I think it needs to be a public-private solution. And I think, as the mayor was saying, there's more to be done on this topic, right? And so we're gonna be talking about possibly things this year. A regulatory program is not going to happen this year, right? I can tell you that. There's not enough time. Right. We've had discussions with the sheriff about this. This is a multifaceted, emotional topic, right? So,
So let me just add, so Mike always
Yeah.
is much more eloquent than I am about this kind of stuff, but it's a pleasure to finally meet you. We've been engaged in a lot of email dialogue back and forth. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so I do appreciate your
Yeah.
concerns. You've done tremendous research on this, and we appreciate that. We do take this whole thing about the tubing on the icicle and the use of private access points, quite a few of them here, and some of the issues that raises.
Well, it's created a nuisance.
Yeah.
Real bad nuisance.
Yeah, and so we clearly recognize that, and so that's why we're up in our game.
I didn't just move on the river and come into this. I've been up
Right,
on
it's
the
been
river
there a
since
while. Yeah,
1960.
yeah.
Yes,
There was no tubing then.
yeah. So this is our first step to be able to address it in an appropriate manner.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you.
So thank you, Will.
We have some questions via Zoom.
Perfect. And yeah, why don't we?
Okay, I'll do
Go-
one
do it.
question via
Okay.
Zoom here. Okay, have there been yearly testings in both Wenatchee and Icicle Creek in terms of tubing and use where the wild fish lay their eggs, and are they being scraped away?
Yeah, what's really interesting about this is that our committee had questions about this. Are there impacts to fish? And I think if you see people walking around the river and that it's spawning time, right? You just you just assume there's impacts. Candidly, it has been difficult to get any kind of response, from agencies who work on those issues about this specific topic, right? And so I think as a committee, we need to figure out a different way to get people who have jurisdiction and expertise in this to actually weigh in on this topic specifically, because it's not something that the county, and there's other groups in here who do a lot of habitat restoration. We have some scientists on staff who do this kind of work, but it's not necessarily our thing. It's not our jurisdiction, right? And so we have struggled with getting those folks kind of just to weigh in, wherever the impacts may be, we just haven't been able to get them involved. So I think that's something that's on our list. Did you have more from the Zoom?
Yeah, so there's another question about the same as their studies on the potential bacterial contamination spreading from recreation equipment using different waterways and not cleaning the equipment beforehand.
Yeah, we have not done any kind of water quality testing that would show impacts. Again, I think it's one of those, maybe there are some impacts. I think they're probably short-term and, limited to, the time that people are actually in the river or a short time after that. But we don't have that kind of we don't have the resources to do that kind of real-time testing.
Okay, and there was a response just to the fish thing from Amanda from WDFW, that they responded to questions about impacts to spawning, and they have not observed any population level impacts associated with this type of activity in rivers.
So Amanda, who's responding, and thank you, Amanda, for doing that. So Amanda Barge is the Assistant Habitat Program Manager with the State Department of Fish and Wildlife. So it's good that, thank you, Amanda, for being online. And I think our committee will have more questions about that. Yes, sir. Yeah, yeah.
Here's a question for you too, Bob. Who in fact is responsible for trash on the river? With the Sheriff's Swiftwater Rescue Team, we go and clean the river 2 or 3 times and come up with about 2 full trash cans, if not more.
Right.
So I'm just curious who, like by law, is responsible for keeping the river clean, because ownership is in question, right?
Yeah, for keeping it clean. Well, you know, I mean, I guess if the sheriff was here, he could probably cite some of the littering laws. So there should be some personal responsibility about that. But your question is like, well, if people aren't taking personal responsibility, then who would do it? Right. And you guys, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, this really ties into a lot of things going on. You know, it's analogous to short-term rentals. You got those that are really responsible, conscientious, and do things right. And you got some that don't. And unfortunately, you regulate towards those that don't, and those that are responsible kind of suffer as a result. And it's a challenge. And so that's the same thing that's going on with the tubing on the icicle. You got folks that really let's do it correctly, responsibly, but you got those that don't. And how do we manage around that? You know, there are impacts to the private landowners. And, you know, they have their property rights as well that are being violated. How do we do this? And how do we manage this? You know, tourism is an increasingly important part of our economy here. How do we manage it responsibly? There's many of these issues that have to do with tubing, with many other aspects going on that we are trying to wrestle with now.
Yeah, I feel like there's volunteers and coalitions that are actually working.
Right, yeah,
I know,
right.
I know a lot of the paddle boat companies or the tubing companies. who
Yeah.
actually clean up on this.
Yeah, and Mike, you can probably address this better than I, but you know, the companies have really been good to work with.
Oh, yeah.
on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really good.
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
They recognize this as an issue and they want to be responsible for it. They're helping us come up with a solution.
Well, I have one more
Yeah.
question. Give it a chance.
Yeah, did we have one? Did you have one online?
We do have another online. You wanna do
Okay,
this one?
do
Okay.
it. And then we'll come back.
Yeah,
to you.
okay, so what possible regulations are being considered in the future?
Yes, so let me answer that carefully. So our committee has talked about possible regulations, looking at examples from other communities who have approached this issue, right? And so there have been, and there are a few, but not many in the Northwest. There have been others in other areas where we've looked. And it really, what it has boiled down to is some kind of permit or reservation system during high use times, you know, and it could be similar to something like what the Forest Service does for, you know, permitting for the Alpine Lakes. I don't necessarily want to use that as the best example. I'm just saying it is an example. I think that's probably the kind of system we would see in the future. What we haven't really talked about is, well, what would that look like here? Who would do it, right? Because we got people putting in the county, we have people putting in the city, people putting in on the fish hatchery. And so there's lots of bureaucracy around that we have to work through. But I think that in terms of like what has been discussed is that kind of a program. I think we would need to do that sort of in tandem with the ambassador kind of program that we have as well. I mean, personally, I want to continue to see that public-private partnership on this. So it's not just kind of a government program, but that we're working with the business community and we're trying to encourage personal responsibility. I think if it becomes too heavy on the government side, we're not great at that on our own.
Keith said that us landowners are the liability if somebody gets hurt on our property, we're not liable for it because there's a new liability clause for the state of Washington will carry anybody that gets hurt.
Mhm.
Now, Keith said if I put up no trespassing signs, then that liability thing goes away, that I'm liable for my own property then.
Mm.
Now, that's just what he said. I know it's not true. But
Also, I'm glad Keith's not here to defend
The whole,
himself. Okay,
the whole thing of it is if I charge a fee to use my property, then it goes away. Now,
Right.
a commercial company putting tubers on the river, they're charging a fee. So if they get hurt, they're making them sign a waiver that they aren't liable for any action. So the state of Washington is covering these guys getting hurt on my property or somewhere else's property, but they're charging a fee. So that's just goes against all. I mean, the owner, if he charges a fee, he doesn't get that liability, exemption.
So I'm going to take that as a comment, Will, because we've had lots of discussions about legal issues, right? And so, this is not the forum where we're going to try to resolve liability and legal issues, right? So.
But this is just a great example.
Oh, yeah.
You would think that resolving a tubing issue on a small stream, small reach of a small stream would be pretty straightforward. But there are all these complications that do arise related to liability, whether it's waters of the state, whether it's private property.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Well,
Just takes lawyer.
Yeah, it does take a few lawyers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we're starting this process, working our way through. So we see that it is a problem and we're trying to figure out how to address it.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So first, I want to say thank you. We live on Icicle right by the bridge and
Okay.
cars are parked all the way back to our house. We oftentimes can't move because we certainly can't take grandkids out walking anywhere near the bridge because the rafting people, the independent rafting people are parked on our bike lanes and our walking lanes. So thank you. And are you looking at parking? And also I can see that if we're going to have work on the Icicle Bridge, it'll be kind of solved. I mean,
Yes.
it'll be different this year.
Yeah.
But are you guys looking at parking and what can be done about that?
Yeah, there's actually two things about parking. I can mention the study too, right? Okay. For the committee's work on this topic, we have been talking about parking and just trying to find areas. We've talked about parking. We've talked about a shuttle system, where we could move people, particularly during the high use periods. The county did recently receive some funds, thanks to Commissioner Bugert, to do a parking analysis that I think is probably going to focus on the upper Wenatchee Valley initially to identify areas where we know, particularly in the county right away, where we have these kinds of parking issues, right? And so the idea is to at least initially build a really strong inventory of where we know there are parking issues in the county right away, and then identify, well, what could we do about it, right? And it's interesting because we've, particularly, I think it was last year, the wildflower season here was incredible, right? Well, everybody from Bellevue came to Wenatchee to Leavenworth to see the wildflowers. And, all the parking lots we had were just overwhelmed, right? I mean, I saw it down in Wenatchee where I live. I saw it up here. And our public works folks, of course, they deal, it's a safety issue like you're identifying. And so we're going to be looking at that as a county to see, are there some areas where we could expand parking? Can we lease parking, temporarily? Because of this seasonal component to it, it's there's a lot we have to think through in terms of, investments and infrastructure and what kinds of solutions, but we are looking into it. Yes, ma'am. I'll repeat the question. So go ahead.
I'd love to see no parking zone.
Okay. So Commissioner Bugert, there's a request for a no parking zone on Icicle Road. Did you?
Yeah, one thing that we did do, we did see a lot of increased parking all along the Wenatchee River, all the way from the lake down to Sleepy Hollow, and people parking in really inappropriate, unsafe areas. And so the commission, the standard parking violation citation is $35. And frankly, for a lot of people that come over from Seattle, that's how much they pay an hour for parking over. That's just part of their way of doing business. So we had a good discussion with Sheriff Brian Burnett about, what is appropriate level, and that we had the authority to set it at $105 as a parking permit, because we just had some serious safety issues about where people are parking. But that's not a fix. It's a Band-Aid. And so, we are just seeing more and more of this come along. We need to be much more proactive about this. It's, it's an important part of our economy, but we really need to figure out how to do it in a responsible and proactive manner.
So why don't we take two more questions, because we have two more
got more
topics
stuff.
we want to cover, right? So, and it's more recreation stuff. So,
Question.
okay, let's do that, and then we'll do one more here.
Okay. So what would bureaucracy around local resident ability to put in a paddleboard look like versus folks that don't live here?
Yeah, so we have talked about that too. Are there, do we make some kind of provisions? If this is the question, tell me if I'm not understanding it, but can we make provisions for sort of non-tubers or locals or non-locals, right? Can we just address issues like during high use periods? So we've talked about all of this. I would say as a group, it seems like addressing the high use periods are really the top priority piece. And probably that looks like some kind of a reservation system, but we don't have any details on that. So why don't we take one more question on that, and then we can switch gears.
One more Zoom question.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. I'm just going to read the whole thing. The survey made it very clear that the greatest concern of residents was the environmental quality of the river. Those concerns are driven by the significant increase in the number of tubers in recent years. The chamber's people didn't help with that issue. What are the county and city doing to address the environmental and habitat concerns?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the couple things. One, I'm really glad that Amanda Barge weighed in from the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, right? Because there's some expertise there, but we're not hearing a lot of concern, from the fisheries community on those impacts. But I think that's something that's worth exploring a little bit more. We are seeing some land use impacts from where people put in, and it's just not sustainable in some areas, right? So we're going to have to do something to either restore those areas. We want to be careful about restricting access because people are just going to go somewhere else, right? And so we need to figure out some kind of a plan and some kind of a system so we can maybe move people to different locations. There's a lot to think about there, but I think it's a great question. All right. Yeah, why don't we talk briefly about the pathways plan, and then we can go to the Whitewater Park. Does that make sense, Aaron? Okay. I don't think we have any graphics for the pathways plan. I just wanted to cover this pathways plan briefly, just to introduce you to the topic. And there's going to be, the reason it's going to be brief tonight is because there's going to be a lot more. There's going to be public process on this later this year as part of our, the county is required to update our Parks and Rec plan every 6 years, 7 years. And so it expires in March of 2023. So we're going to be updating that plan later this year. So the pathways plan, which I'll tell you about, that is going to be sort of formally vetted publicly through the Parks and Rec plan at the end of this year and the beginning of 2023. So on the pathways plan, the full name of the pathways plan is the Chelan County Multimodal Pathways Plan. We use the word pathways because we were trying to distinguish pathways from trails, or sort of paved pathways from dirt trails. Commonly, we all use the word trails, right? Like trails for everything. But we do make a little bit of a distinction here because we're looking at kind of interurban pathway connections between, say, Wenatchee and Monitor and Kashmir and Manson and Chelan and Malaga and Wenatchee. So about a year and a half ago, the county helped coordinate with all of the cities in the county, the Chelan-Douglas Regional Port Authority and the Chelan-Douglas Land Trust, and we pooled funds to launch this Chelan County Pathways Plan effort. And we spent about 12, 14 months doing surveys of citizens. I think we had something like 1,400 responses. Some of you may have responded to the survey information that was sent out. We also did an inventory of existing pathway plans. So Leavenworth has a pathway plan, an internal pathway plan, which you probably call a trails plan, but it's, for our purposes, it's pathways. Kashmir has one, Manson has one, Chelan has one. There have been ideas, in the rural areas as well. So we really just pulled all of that information together. And so we have now what we're calling a draft pathways plan. And there's a tremendous amount of information from all the survey work that we did, those 1,400 people who provided input on it, all the agencies who worked on it. So there's just this mountain of information. Probably what's most interesting in that pathways plan is at the end, we have maps that show potential alignments. And we just had a meeting up in Kashmir where we went into a little bit of detail saying that, how would you get from Monitor to Kashmir? And there's 3 different potential ways you could get there, largely following public right-of-way. So it could be county road, could be DOT highway. So we have a lot of information around that. What's that?
The river as well.
The river. Thanks, Will. And so, given all the information, there's a lot of enthusiasm around this pathways plan, but it was not sort of fully publicly vetted, right? And I would say that, one word of caution about the existing pathways plan is that it is very much it's more like a white paper, I'd say, right? I think until it goes through that public process and the whole community has an opportunity to weigh in on it, I think it's a little premature to call it a final plan, right? Because I think there are clearly, from the survey results we got, it was mostly from folks who wanted to have pathways, user groups. But there are a lot of opportunities for pathways to be potentially off of the county road and off of the state highway. But of course, that involves private property, could be other, there are a couple other property categories. We're having a full discussion with the grower community right now about potential impacts and locations. And so there's a lot to think about there. And so we're gonna build a fuller public process as we update our Parks and Rec plan. So this pathways plan is going to be part of that official update, right? So then there'll be more public engagement opportunities. Everything we did was virtual as well, right? And it's not really adequate, in our opinion, to adopt that kind of plan without having kind of in-person workshops and charrettes and working with private landowners and working with the grower community. We just didn't have an opportunity to do that. But that's what we're planning on doing later this year in the beginning of 2023. So in the plan, there are a number of recommendations for the Leavenworth area. Since we're in Leavenworth, I thought I'd just cover that briefly. And there are a lot of them, because you can go from Leavenworth, down to Peshastin, you can go up to Lake Wenatchee, you can go out, East Leavenworth Road and Icicle Road. So when we release the maps later this year, you'll see all of those concepts there. And so I think that's where we're going to want to get more input from private property owners, what have you. The other thing I think you'll see in the plan is that there are some design drawings in there about what a pathway might look like, right? I thought that conversation about the bridge was really interesting, right? Because there are all kinds of ways that people could get across that road, right? I mean, I thought that was a pretty nice design, but it's all about separation, right? It's like, do you have people like right on the road? Are they separated from the road by a barrier? Is it like the loop trail in Wenatchee, where it's a completely dedicated easement, pathway easement that's completely separated from the highway? So the answer to the question, what is a pathway, is all of those things, right? And so I think that's what we have to figure out for some of these alignments is, well, what might it look like in the Leavenworth area? What can private property owners tolerate? from a pathway perspective. So there's going to be a lot more on that, but in case you hadn't heard about the pathways plan, we wanted to share with you tonight that there is one and that there's going to be a lot of work on it later this year. Are there any questions about the pathways plan? Yes, sir.
With the Rails to Trails program, are there any abandoned railroad easements that could be incorporated?
We don't have any in Chelan County that I'm aware of. Interestingly, there are some older abandoned irrigation canal rights of way. There are a couple in the sort of Monitor to Cashmere area. There actually used to be a canal that ran pretty low from Cashmere down to Monitor, came off the Wenatchee River. That's been abandoned. There are some in the Peshastin area as well. Whether they're useful or not, I think is to be seen depending on what it would connect up with. Right. But there is an old one on the that port property in Cashmere on the far side. You can see it really clearly on the map. There's an old irrigation canal just sitting right there. Yeah, there you go. Right. So there's some interesting things out there when you look at the maps. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. Okay. All right. So with that, I think our last topic then is the Wenatchee Whitewater Park feasibility study. So Aaron McKay in our office is one of our senior project managers. Has been doing just a great job with a lot of the recreation work and a lot of the community forestry work. We do a lot of forest health work at the county, and Aaron heads up a lot of that work. So it's a nice intersection of sort of working in the rural areas, forest health, and recreation. So we decided we'd have Aaron work on rivers as well because they're easy, right? Well, yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, it turns out there's a lot of overlap between recreation and natural resources in our area. So it's really fun to work on these projects and get some good restoration work into the mix as well. So I wanted to say really quick before launching into this topic, the river recreation study that was done in 2020 is available on our website if people wanted to take a look at the numbers that came out of that. And it also has a list of recommendations for addressing some of the issues that really came up out of that report. So I can't tell you exactly where on our website, but if you go to just the Chelan County Natural Resource website and then look under planning, there's a sidebar with various topics. And if you don't see it there, just Google Leavenworth River Recreation Study. Okay, so I'm gonna start from the beginning on this. I'll try to be brief so I don't take up too much time, but I know this is kind of the first time a lot of people have heard about this. I think some folks have been tracking it all along, but I'm going to back up to 2017 when we did our county comprehensive plan update. Every 7 years, the comprehensive plan gets updated, and the Natural Resource Department took on the recreation element of that plan. So we did a bunch of outreach, got a lot of feedback from the community on what they would like to see in terms of recreation opportunity and infrastructure in the county. And one thing that came through very clearly from a lot of people was an interest in some sort of whitewater park or feature in the Wenatchee River. This has been going on in a lot of other states across the country with a lot of success. These whitewater parks have really drawn a lot of economic benefit to areas and kind of brought up some faltering economies in towns across the country. So, so that made it in as a high priority action in the recreation element, was to do a feasibility study for a whitewater park. And there was also, along with those comments, sort of in conjunction with the whitewater park, people were really interested in looking at the Dryden Dam site in terms of safety improvements to the site. There has been at least one fatality there. It's a low head dam that creates a hydraulic that can catch people within the hydraulic. So those were kind of lumped together because that's how they came to us from the community. But we also knew that we needed to extend this feasibility across the basin to determine, like, is there even a good site, and what might those, or more than one site, and what might those sites be? So some funding became available to work on these high priority things within the comprehensive plan. So we were able to launch this feasibility study in, I guess, right about this time last year in 2021. We contracted with 2 consulting firms, Recreation Engineering and Planning, originally out of Colorado, but they specialize in whitewater parks and also safety retrofits of lowhead dams. So, and then also Par Excellence, which is a salmon habitat recovery special consulting firm. They do a lot of restoration projects and assessments and things. So we knew that in this area, the habitat side of things is, premium. There are endangered species in the river. And so anything that's considered here has to be of some net, no net impact to fish, any aquatic species, and preferably have a net ecological uplift associated with it. So, so with this group, with the small group, in early April last year, we took a look at a bunch of sites across the Wenatchee Basin. We also had the PUD involved in those sites, and Department of Fish and Wildlife as well accompanied us on all these site visits. So, so this is the report that came out of that process, and we did a public outreach component as well. We had a kind of a stakeholder group with a lot of the people that initially reached out in the comprehensive plan update process. There was a committee that became organized, the Wenatchee River Alliance. That's sort of the recreational community that is interested in whitewater recreation access. And then various agencies and the PUD, the tribes. So when this plan, or not a plan, this feasibility study was complete, we released it to that group publicly. It's on our website as well, and asked for feedback. So we did a comment period on it and received feedback that we've documented. And so I can do this. So here's a list of the sites we took a look at. Basically, the sites were selected based on criteria of public access to these sites. There has to be the ability for the public to get to these sites. The hydraulics that would be conducive to creating a whitewater feature that would be, that would be attractive to recreationalists. And then you can see a variety of other, the habitat improvement potential, we're particularly interested in any existing constraints, man-made constraints in the river at these locations. Most of the whitewater parks that exist that have been constructed and implemented have been at lowhead dams that are relic dams, not utilized anymore, but creating public safety hazard, or just a bunch of concrete in the river. And so this is what came out of that. And you can see that 2 sites really jumped out. The Dryden Dam site, not surprisingly, and the historic Mill Dam in Leavenworth, right here. The other sites just didn't have the potential that was needed, or the access, or various things just made them not conducive for further exploration. So, so those 2 sites kind of floated to the top, and at that point over the winter, so the report was finished in the fall. We did our public outreach in the fall, and then over the winter we continued to work with stakeholders to kind of feel out the next steps on these two sites. We met with the Dryden Dam, or we met with the PUD and the tribes who operate a broodstock collection facility at the Dryden Dam. The PUD also operates a broodstock collection program there for their habitat program. And basically, it's a complex site. There's a lot of infrastructure right on the bank. There's good access there. It's a WDFW access point, but the infrastructure itself is very much right there with kind of preventing any I mean, you guys all are probably familiar with it. If you want to port it to the dam, you take out above the big metal broodstock collection facility, and then you put back in right below that. So basically what came out of it was that recreational development at this site was really not worth the relocation of all the restructuring of the entire facility for those groups who are invested in it and utilizing it right now. Maybe at some point down the future, there could be potential when we're talking about greater multiple different benefits that could be involved there. There's an irrigation diversion there as well. If we could look at, is there a way to get more in-stream flow by changing some things around? And there needs to be more benefits to convince these stakeholders that it is worth doing something there. So the PUD also recognizes the safety hazard there, but they told us that they would like to handle that internally themselves, and that they didn't need our assistance any further with it. So that's something that the PUD is taking on their own, and we're shifting focus elsewhere at this point. So it kind of comes down to, at this point, the last feasible spot is the old mill site here in Leavenworth. So we recognize there's challenges here. It's not the ideal, like from an economic benefit standpoint, it's not bringing, tourism to a struggling area per se. So that's not ideal, but it is interesting in multiple other ways. One interesting aspect is there is a man-made structure in the river right there that's a relic dam that has concrete metal pieces sticking out, treated timbers. It's an impact in the river. It's a historic impact for sure, but there is potential for restoration there, and not only just restoration of the mill structure itself, but there's some habitat things that could be looked at. And so that's definitely of interest. There's also the river recreation study that's going on right now that Mike talked about. We know there's issues with parking, trash use, all of these things with heavy recreation right in this area. If we're talking about ways to manage that, this is a good time to talk about any potential project at Barn Beach as well. It's just the right time to talk about it if it's going to be talked about at all. And then also a whitewater feature here could be something that doesn't necessarily have to coincide with the peak tourist and tubing times, which that's kind of takes over the low flow period of the summer. But if there were something that were attractive to local residents and visitors alike in terms of whitewater, that could very well be shoulder season timing that wouldn't necessarily have to create conflict there. So there's definitely interesting things to look at here. And so where we're at now with it is basically working on an alternatives analysis and just looking at a range of options. And the term whitewater park is such a broad term that I think a lot of people have ideas of what it means, but it actually can mean a whole range of things. So it could be anything from a feature with boulders that creates a wave that is sufficient for kayakers, surfers, suppers to recreate on, or it could be a full channel spanning feature like, well, in a lot of the other ones across the country are kind of these more built up things with a mechanized lift that can change the wave height and be manipulated across the year. So there's a whole range of things. So what we want to look at is the full range of alternatives and work with stakeholders and public and agencies in the city and to take a look at that. I'll look at these alternatives and kind of help determine if there is one or two alternatives that might make sense here that could help, that could touch on all the different benefits. And so that's what we're working on right now, is this draft alternatives analysis. And the time is ripe to start talking with the city and with the agency, the fisheries agencies, and just kind of start to explore some of these concepts. And just to kind of give an idea of what the alternative, this is just an aerial topographic view of the river, and you can kind of see it's a little bit washed out, but I can do this. Anyway, there it is. So there's the old mill dam. When the dam was decommissioned, it was basically blasted out just on this side, and the rest of it was left in place. So this is a deep, fairly swift channel right now, and then you have a spot in the middle of the dam that water pours over at higher flows and kind of creates this back eddy right here. So anyway, it's just an aerial, but the alternatives could, obviously the no alternative, don't do anything. An alternative that would focus just on restoration of the dam and habitat improvement projects, and potentially if a very simple feature, there could be sort of more of a built up, like there could be two, there's actually enough hydraulic drop to have like two features. And then that would be more of a focus on the recreation aspect and less on purely restoration objective. But whether or not there's a whitewater feature incorporated into this area, we want to look at it for potential and just assess all these alternatives. So that's where we're at.
Any questions for Erin?
Oh, we gotta, hold on, we're doing question room. I really appreciate the history, kind of where the project started. That was pretty informative to hear. And I'm kind of wondering, the idea came out in 2017 based on stakeholders, and pretty clear this rose up as an interest. Life has changed a lot between 2017 and 2022 in terms of locally the feel about impact on the river. And when you talk about the stakeholders group or the stakeholders that you've been talking with, is that more people who are advocating for this? Is that who that group is, or what does that mean?
Yeah, I would say that we were responding to the people who showed interest originally to keep them engaged in the progress, because people wanted to know what's coming of this. So a lot of that group was from the recreational side, but then we did have the agencies, the city folks, the tribes. Like I said, we had the kind of more regulatory side involved as well. And yeah, I mean, I think that's where we were drawing from, was that group. Yeah.
So I was just going to ask you kind of a general sense here, Aaron, how would a whitewater park work? I don't think we really know. Like people take a ticket, they get in line, they get their kayak. How does that, do they know how that was going to kind of happen? And how long would this area, do you have any idea of what area the shoreline would be involved with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's different across the board with every whitewater park. It's different. Most of them you don't pay to use. It's just a river recreation opportunity. The lower the maintenance need, the less you need to have a controlled approach to it. The footprint here, I mean, it varies in the range of alternatives, but really it's just looking at this area right here.
Did you, so that's Burn Beach on the other side, right?
Yes.
So has there been some survey of the community about how very profoundly sacred that is to our community? How it's been fought for? I mean, you probably do, but can you tell me more about, because I have a strong emotional connection.
Yeah, no, I
when
mean,
I'm
it's a
hearing
great
about
point.
that.
And yeah, it's kind of right at the heart of yeah. So we haven't gotten to that step yet. Before really taking those next steps, we needed to know what we were even talking about or proposing. And we're not even quite there yet because there's still this range of alternatives that we want to run by people and get their input on those first before even having any type of proposal to run that survey by. But no, we haven't gotten to that point yet. So
I just got a question about the stakeholder and the shareholders. I've noticed in all your paperwork, in every study, everything about the river, the salmon, you always bring up shareholders and stakeholders. And you always list them. There's always a big old list, Indians and the PUD and this county. But now I never see one listing of a property owner. Not one. I guess we're not stakeholders or shareholders.
Well, I do there. So with the recreation survey, that was a huge component because we sent out a survey to every landowner and a paper copy survey to every landowner on the icicle and Wenatchee River. So in that case, there's direct feedback that we're looking from landowners. So we do try to make things publicly available on the website, get these things out there for the community to weigh in on. And we do consider private landowners as a stakeholder for sure.
It doesn't ever show. Maybe I could just print it in there once in a while then.
Print it?
Print it in with the rest of the names. that you call
Yeah,
shareholders.
yeah. Good point.
We do one more question, we got to move on.
Okay, we do have a Zoomer.
Two more.
Aaron, what season would such a thing happen and CFS range?
So that's dependent on what type of project is being proposed. So I can tell you for sure, there's nothing like mechanized or channel spanning or anything like that proposed in this. I mean, we know that that's obviously not a good fit for this river here. So it would be a natural a feature that would rely on natural flows and would probably be more of a range of I'm just going to throw out there maybe 1,500 to and above CFS. Just kind of knowing the hydraulics here, anything that would be able to have a feature would have to have flows more than just base flows, which I guess 1,500 is still pretty low. But yeah, I think it'd be more of a spring and fall type of thing that it would work in. And yeah, I also want to reiterate, knowing what our our local sentiment about our river here and how like important it is to have a natural system. Anything that would be proposed here would be would fit within the footprint of, you know, what's already been impacted in this area, and the goal would not be to draw a huge amount of people. It would be more of to see if there's an opportunity to have a restoration project here that could also benefit the local recreationists.
One last question.
I think you answered most of that really well. That was a lot leaning on there because when you say park,
yeah,
all sorts of images come up like Six Flags type
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
And obviously that's already been a big issue in Leavenworth. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify, and I think what you're saying is what I'm hearing, it's a great opportunity to clean up and improve some history, but also some potential not environmentally friendly stuff. Making something natural and look good is obviously your number one priority, probably. What I'm hearing is, you know, this is just a feature on the river that a surfer, kayaker could go out and play on, and maybe a trail, not a park like a lot of us may be imagining, right?
Yes, I think you nailed it, and thank you for that clarification. And also, of course, any like hydraulic impacts to migrating fish species, those would be included in any type of assessment work that would go into this too.
Aaron, I do thank you for then walking us through that. Let me assure you that for this project, for the tubing project, for the pathways process going on, we will deeply engage the community in this discussion. I will assure you of that. It's very clear that this is sensitive issues and that we really want to do it right and make sure that we are fully engaging with you. Speaking of fully engaging, I'm asking Mike to do a super quick update on the community forest, which has been quite a public process there.
60 seconds.
You got 60 seconds.
All right.
Go.
Yes. So I just want to update you guys, if you're familiar or if you're not familiar with the Nason Ridge Community Forest effort. We've been working for 4 years now with the Lake Wenatchee community to purchase the 4,000 acre parcel kind of there by Cole's Corner, Lake Wenatchee, Butcher Creek along Nason Creek. So we're supposed to close on the property on April 14th, which is wonderful. It's been 4 years to do this. What's really cool about that piece of property is, you know, now that the county's going to own it, State Parks has already talked about expanding their services there. Aaron's been doing a lot of great forest health work up there. A community forest is a managed forest, right? So there's going to be forest health restoration on the property. There's great conservation values on the property. There's going to be more recreation on the property. There's a steering committee who's going to be working on this. And so there'll be a tour later this summer, and we'll let you all know about that. So, thanks, Bob. 60 seconds.
Okay, I do want to thank you once again. We are closing at 8 o'clock. Mayor Florea, do you have anything you want to say?
So then I don't need to say anything. This is just the beginning of a conversation. And I hope you understand that too. You know, this is not city sponsoring anything. You know, this is the city sponsoring the beginning of a conversation. So, you know, we value that input. I'm committed to that input. This is, you know, the community I'm a part of here. So we're going to do what is best for this community. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, thank you. We've got a lot more stuff we want to share with you. So next time we'll set up another session. Thank you.
If you're able to help put a chair away, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. Thanks, virtual friends.